morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this midday, I guess it is. This is Kate Jarian, and with me is also Bridget Farrell and John Dow from the state office, and we're going to be taking you through different portions of this little training session. We are recording this, so if you'd like to watch it again or have someone else that needs to see it, we'll certainly send a link out to the recording along with copies of the slides for you to review. Because this is a webinar, it's going to be listen only for you. So if you have a question or there's a problem with you being able to hear us or being able to see what we're doing, please either raise your hand or ask a question in the question box, and we'll try to get to that. You can also use that obviously for substantive questions that come up as we go through the material. So with that, I think we'll get started, and I'll turn it over to Bridget to take you through. We're going to be starting to use BoardPack, as she'll explain, and some of you may be familiar with that and others may not be. So we just wanted to give you a little intro to what that is involved with.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Kate mentioned, we will be starting a new online portal that will house all of our meeting materials for Board of Governor meetings. And some of you, as I see on the list there, that some have used it already from either being on executive committee or a part of another committee. We right now use it for executive committee, the budget and finance, our financial sustainability review committee, our audit committee, and our trust services board. So for those that are not familiar, it's just an online portal. On the next screen, I'll show you that it's very simple. It looks like a notebook. But we are hoping to do this for the upcoming January 25th meeting, and we're trying to think of an easy way to get it out to everybody. So I'm going to do it by each region, and then I'll be able to help people easier than having all of our Board of Governors email me at once or call me at once. So just look for an email from me over the next couple weeks with the note that I will be sending you an email with a temporary password. So we can go to the next slide. So as I said, you'll be issued an auto-generated password that will come to your email that we have on file. This is an auto-generated password that will come directly from BoardPack itself, that you have this password. And as soon as you get that email, you should log into BoardPack right away and put in your temporary password, and then change it to whatever password you would like. If you do not do this within a specific time frame, the password is void, and then you have to contact me, and then I'll send another auto-generated email or password. But the screen below will show you what it looks like when you get in the system. To the left is the dates by year and then month, and then by the committee that you're associated with. And then to the right, it'll be the committee that you're associated with, or in this case, it'll be the Board of Governors. You can go to the next slide. So like I mentioned, where the red arrow is, it should pop up the date of the meeting, and then it will say what it is, Board of Governors, Executive Committee. It'll tell you if it's a regular meeting, a conference call, and it'll just say the ARC New York, State Office Latham. And then it will have an RSVP button, which is very simple to use. I can go through that with you if you have any questions when you're in the portal itself, but you basically just click on that button and it'll pop up a box that will say yes or no, and you click on yes, it'll turn a darker gray, I believe, or if you can't, you hover over the no and it'll turn a darker gray, and then it just says send. But and underneath is the agenda and then all the associated documents. You can go to the next screen. I think that'll, as in this case, we have a meeting this week for the executive committee, and I'll start with the agenda, and then down below that are the documents associated with each agenda item. And then when you want it, you just hover over it and you click on it, and it'll pop up in its own internet browser. It'll be a different link. And then you also print from that. So if you're hooked up to a printer or save it to your desktop, you should be able to do that as well. But if on the right side of the screen where it says my name, welcome Bridget Farrell, you'll click on there to change your password, your settings. They do have some news and training videos that you can review on your time to just maybe get a little bit more tutorial on what you need to look for within the portal itself. And then you also log out. So those are the basics of Board Pack. Like I said, I'm not sure which region I'll start with first, but just look out for an email from me, and that should do it.
And this is Kate, and I think one of the main benefits to this is that, instead of getting the documents for each meeting by email, where then things are subject to change or addition, and you have to make sure you gather those in the same place, this will be the place where you can just log on and that whatever is in there is the current agenda, all of the current materials that you're going to need, and then you don't need to print anything out. If you have an iPad or a laptop or even a phone, you can bring it to the meeting and review the materials on there, or you can print them out and bring them with you. So we're hoping that it'll help keep us all more organized.
It should, and there's some things that the portal does that we haven't really explored yet. So as we go through the process, there might be some other things we can put in there, but it is a good place where everything is kept. I know I usually send it out to chapter executive directors and the chapter administrative assistants. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do with that. I might just email it to them separately, the documents I should say, but I'll let everyone know as we get closer to the board meeting.
And then, as Bridget said, on the left, those meetings that you're a part of will remain in the history. So if you wanted to review the materials from the last meeting or from a meeting a year ago, it should all be kept up there. So it's kind of a nice place to archive it all without you having to save it to your own device.
Right.
Okay, so I think at this point we'll switch over to the training, and thank you, Bridget. Again, if you have questions about that, let her know. Forgive us for needing to transition here. Okay, and then we're going to get started with the training.
Thanks. I'll, I guess, start us off. So we're going to break today's session up into 3 parts, and there will be some repetition of a few pieces of information, but each time we're going to go into that item in just a little bit more detail. We're going to start off just going over the general structure of the organization itself and what each part does. We'll drill down a little more into the detail of each piece of the organization and some of the policies that impact each part of what we are. And then we'll talk very briefly about your role as a board member and some of the legal obligations that you all have. So this first part, probably the primary thing that we'll talk about is the chapter that you come from versus your role as a member of the Board of Governors and your responsibilities to the corporation as a whole. Particularly with reference to what is it that you are focused on and responsible for when you make a decision as a Board of Governor versus when you're sitting on your chapter board. And there are many similarities, but certainly some very key differences that I'm going to highlight. So our structure as a corporation is certainly unique. We are one single 501c3 nonprofit corporation. And so to give you all an example, to illustrate this a little more, I assume quite a few of you have probably gone to eat at Olive Garden at one point. However, there is no such corporate entity as Olive Garden. It's actually Darden Restaurants. Olive Garden is just a division of that other corporation. And the chapters are, I guess, similar to that relationship. They're not separately incorporated, though they have affiliates like property holding companies or foundations that are. But the chapters exist to be, in many ways, the boots on the ground, providing the services that we, that the board chooses to carry out on a county level. What this means is really, though, that we're all in this together, since we're all one body. And if you've heard either at the chapter level or at the Board of Governors, anybody talk about spillover liability, this is part of what that means. If we had chapters that were separately incorporated, if they had a financial difficulty or legal troubles, they could dissolve or declare bankruptcy. But that's not an option in our case. So if one chapter is having a hard time, that risk spreads to everyone, and every part of the corporation would be responsible for that. And so that is in part where you all come in as a board of governor. So this illustrates that relationship perhaps a little more graphically. The local chapter boards exist, as I said, to provide some oversight on the ground within their county. And they've had some authority delegated to them by the Board of Governors or some function of the board, which could be the executive committee or work groups. And they report back up through those bodies, in part through all of you, to make sure that whatever responsibilities were put to them have been done. And it is the state office's responsibility to take direction from the board and its committees and make sure that we're providing both oversight within the organization and a sort of unified advocate throughout the state and within state government on behalf of all parts of the organization. So that sort of jumps into this slide. The state office is, as I said, responsible for the administration of the corporation, and that's on behalf of the Board of Governors. So the board resolved many years ago to create this office just to govern our public policy and our policy within, again, with direction from the Board of Governors, and also to provide some of that oversight role. We exist only within the confines that are established for us by the board, and the same goes for the chapter boards also. It's really all about delegation from the powers that the board reserves to itself. So the state office was at one time in New York City, but has moved up to Latham. And beyond those sort of administrative day-to-day tasks, we also do a lot of special projects. A lot of those are going to come back to you as a Board of Governor for review and approval. Those include, for example, the ongoing work groups that are talking about our retirement policies, governance, quality, and compliance, you name it. There is something that we have been asked to oversee. And we try to provide some kind of advice and coordination for those meetings. But a big part of what we've done from day one is also to provide advocacy. And that's part of why we're in Albany. We're a good 15 or 20 minutes from the state legislature, and that makes it very easy for us to take on some direction from the Board of Governors and then make sure that those directives are heard by key individuals in state government. And because of the collection of professionals that we have here, we can sort of attack those directives and missions in a variety of different ways and really provide a coordinated voice on behalf of the whole organization. We're a relatively small operation, though. The majority of the state office, about 2/3 of our staff, are actually in the NYSARC Trust. For those of you who are not familiar with the trust, it manages actually a fairly significant amount of money, as you see there, and provides trust services both to individuals within the IDD community, but also to folks who are a little older and may be trying to claim some federal benefits, but have some extra assets that they would otherwise have to spend down if they wanted to utilize the full amount of resources that they could be. So what we do is hold those resources for them and help them to use them in ways that don't impact their federal benefits. Part of the state laws that allow us to offer this kind of trust do have a condition where when those individuals pass away, the funds that remain in their accounts stay with the organization. And the NYSARC trustees have seen fit in years past to give those out as grants that go to the chapters. Obviously, those grants, as noted there, have some requirements and qualifications, but primarily they are underwriting some of the extra programs and guardianship efforts that are not otherwise something that we can bill for or be compensated for from the state. So it's a valuable service in terms of the financial management they provide, and also the remainder resources that go to chapters.
The other piece I would add on that that's not reflected in the slide is that, the assessments to the chapters to fund the state office are also supplemented by the trust services. They charge obviously fees to people who receive these services from our trusts, and some of those monies do go to offset the chapter assessments. So in addition to the $3 million or so that's reflected there, that's another important piece of the function that they serve.
So the part of the state office that you're most likely to interact with, either as a chapter board member or as a member of the Board of Governors, is the state office proper, where Kate and I hail from. We are here to, as I said, carry out the directives of the board, provide advocacy, provide internal oversight, and to provide professional advice to chapters and to members of the board. We're a relatively small group, as you see. The whole legal department is really just Kate and I, and there's one attorney down in the trust who is responsible for their offerings. That's a full-time undertaking unto itself. We now have 2.5 folks in compliance. That's Josh, Eric, and Angela. Over in finance, a growing group also. We have a full-time lobbyist, that's Beth, PR person, and also several individuals in guardianship who you may interact with. So it's a relatively small group trying to cover a fair amount of ground. So as I've sort of alluded to, we've kind of talked about this more generally. We have a dual role of both internal oversight and support and also external advocacy. I would encourage all of you, as you're carrying out your role as a Board of Governor, to ask us questions. There are some members of the board who certainly do that, and we appreciate it, but we are here to provide you with assistance and explanation for what's going on in the state, what you should be thinking about in your role. If you have a motion you'd like to bring, if you have questions about a policy, that is really what we're here for. And I would encourage you, whenever you have a question, to certainly feel free to email Kate and I. We'd be happy to help or direct you to who can help you. A large part of what Kate and I do certainly is also to assist chapters with developing requests that need board approval, though there's others that are involved in that. We provide a hopefully not too constant but fairly consistent stream of information that goes to chapter boards and also key chapter staff on regulatory or legal changes, and also our advocacy efforts. And again, the bulk of what we're doing at any given time is just carrying out those internal policies to try to make sure that the corporation stays competitive and provides quality services. And again, the advocacy as far as Be Fair and other key initiatives. So this leads us to all of you. So the role of the Board of Governors, you can really just consider yourself, despite the name, that you are the Board of Directors. You are the board of this corporation. And as such, you have the ultimate charge of its management that includes all of its assets, its real property, the policies and procedures of its business, and allocating funds to this office as is needed to carry out your directives. You have a fairly broad amount of powers that are reserved to you all by the bylaws. That includes obviously making the rules that govern your own meetings, the various committees and work groups, and also providing directives to this office and the chapters as far as what you would like them to adhere to in their operations. Probably the main thing to, let's hold on that slide for 1 second, to demarcate, and we'll talk about this more in a minute when we get down to chapter structure, is that the Board of Governors is not a legislative body. you do not come to the Board of Governors representing your chapter or its board or its interests. You, and we'll talk about this more later, are representing all chapters, all of their interests, and trying to come up with policies and procedures that, while they may be unfortunately difficult for one or a few chapters to manage, otherwise provide for the collective safety and good of this entire organization, and more importantly, for the needs of those that we support. And if there's really one thing to take away from this and later parts of this presentation, is that that is the main difference. If you're sitting on the chapter board, you are responsible for the chapter. When you come to a Board of Governor meeting, you have to take that hat off and put on a different one where you are thinking about everyone's interests. So now we'll move to the next.
And I would say too, to kind of echo the point that John made earlier about the risk to all, because of our structure, there are also some, benefits to that as well. And on this slide, the second bullet, where it talks about the assets and property of the organization, all of the assets and property that is, under the auspices of each chapter is actually owned or is the property of NYSARC. So all of that wraps up to what your job is in terms of oversight. Again, even though it looks rather separated and parsed out, at the end of the day, your role as a board member of this organization is to support the $1.7 billion that is NYSARC, even though it's divided up across the chapters. And some of the benefits of that structure, even though there's also a risk as well in terms of potential liability, our collective financial strength has allowed the organization to borrow significant amounts of money and have a significant leverage at historically low rates, and get advantages that other independent providers haven't been able to do. So that's just a plug, I think, for the benefit of it, and that's the upside to the downside potential.
So the executive committee, and I would encourage all of you, as time permits, to try to attend a meeting. You are welcome to be present in the gallery and view these discussions. It consists of the officers of the association. We'll go through who they are a little later on, but with certain restrictions, they generally have the same powers as the board, and they meet a little more often than the full Board of Governors to try to carry on some of the directives of the board if there's an intermediate sort of decision that needs to be made. They also hear a lot of the chapter requests, just because those are time sensitive. And if we were waiting for the quarterly meetings of the board, it would potentially, if a chapter wanted to close on a property or something like that, that would be a little difficult. So the executive committee is there to do some of those ministerial tasks, and also to try to drive policy forward, because they're a little bit smaller. And so they can have certain discussions in advance of a board meeting to lay some groundwork that can then go to the full board for additional discussion and votes. So they exist, as we saw on the organization chart, just below the full board, and work alongside it. But certainly something for you all to try to take a look at if you have a chance. So we've talked about quite a few of these points. We're just continuing to move along the corporate chart. We've now covered, obviously, the board, the primary committee of it, which is the executive committee. Obviously, there are, as you know, various specialty committees and work groups that are charged with reporting up to the executive committee and the board for certain projects and priorities. But at the heart of everything is, once again, the chapters. They are, as I said earlier, unincorporated operating units of the corporation. So you can think of them like corporate divisions, and their job is to provide those day-to-day, 24/7, 365 services on the ground in all the counties of the state. Now, their boards have, as I said, the responsibility of monitoring those local operations, but their authority to do so has been delegated to them by the Board of Governors, and they are required to adhere to the confines of that delegation. And where you'll find most of them written down is the chapter manual. Kate and I would be happy to provide any of you a copy of it. We're going to be sending out an updated version shortly. I'd highly encourage you to take a look at it. I realize it's a long document and may not be something that you want to commit to memory. It's more along the lines of good bedtime reading if you need a little help falling asleep. But it is the bylaws of this corporation, and it spells out really what the chapters are supposed to do and what the board has deemed to be important enough to put down as a rule for this corporation. Primarily for your reference as a board of governor, it will spell out the way in which authority has been delegated down to the chapters, but also what has been retained or highlighted as being important by the board. And so the chapter board, as I mentioned earlier, has that local duty, but you all have the authority as the board of governor to try to set up directives that shape and guide that. And the state office is responsible for the insurance that chapters are actually operating in accord with the chapter manual. So the chapter manual itself, again, these are our bylaws. They are a legal document that really is a contract that chapters, as being a part of this organization, agree to adhere to. As I've said several times, it delegates certain rights down to the chapters, but retains certain rights to the board of governor. And really is a compilation that's taken shape over the years that this organization has been in place. Ultimately, its role is to be protective. It requires chapters to prioritize certain things, like having ethics policies, quality and compliance officers, having certain committees, being aware of and being in compliance with state law and federal law. And beyond that document, the chapters certainly have this office to rely on for a little bit of help, as do all of you. Primarily, though, the things that it requires chapters to do really help us to monitor risk, to try to stop problems before they start, and increasingly over the years with things like FSRC, some of the quality and compliance efforts that are continuing to evolve, we're taking steps to be very proactive and ensure that we're still the sort of go-to organization in the state for IDD services. The main thing I'm supposed to take away from this slide is that within that delegation, certain things can be done by the chapters without asking permission, but there are some operational decisions that the Board of Governors and the Executive Committee have to approve, and we've got a limited list there of examples. Really what you'll see that they all have in common, they're changing the way in which we provide services, moving assets around, and again, they're assets of the corporation, so they shouldn't be moving without the board granting permission to do so. And it also sort of speaks to on long-term commitments that a chapter might be making, like a lease, or creating a new entity. So that, I think, kind of lays the groundwork of all the big pieces, and now I'll hand it off to Kate for some of the individual policies of the board.
Thanks, John. Okay, so as John laid out in the beginning, the next piece really is going to sort of be the nuts and bolts of some of the basics of the structure of the board itself and how the organization is made up. And for those of you who have been on the board for some time, I know we call this, quote, new Board of Governor orientation, but a lot of the names in terms of registrants for this were familiar to me. 2 years ago, the board voted to make a pretty significant change to its governing structure. For those who recall, we used to have a board that was bordering on 150 members. And I think you can imagine if your chapter board had 150 people, how difficult probably it would be for you to get some pretty basic things done. And the board also only met twice a year, so it was really hard for it to have the oversight and ability to do the things it needed to do. So these changes here are reflected. We are now fully implemented with those governing changes, and so that's what we'll talk about. So this is a somewhat cut off version of our current regional map. So we are now operating in 8 different regions. We used to have 4, and you can imagine the blobs of color would have been much larger before because we had to cover a large region. And when we tried to meet some people were driving multiple hours in one direction. That may still be the case depending on where you live, but it was the thought that, you know, having smaller regions would foster more regional activity and communication and feedback to the board. So this is the current region. It can be altered by a vote of the Board of Governors. I believe that was most recently done in January of this year to make some changes. So this is what it looks like at the moment. So as John said, although you're not really representing your chapter when you come to the Board of Governors meeting, each chapter is entitled to one governor and one alternate governor for each chapter. Each member has a weighted vote between 1 and 10. That's based on your chapter's membership count. Typically that is recalibrated every August or September. If your membership goes up or goes down or stays the same, we recalculate what that means for the weighted vote of that particular board member. And then that goes from October of one year to October to the following, you know, prior to the following October meeting. As I said, the board only used to meet twice a year. Now they meet 4 times a year. This year, 2018 was the first year that we did the 4 meetings. So we are adjusting to the new format and, you know, readjusting, you know, who makes what decisions and how much time we're spending on things. So we're looking to improve that as we go. A new requirement is that each primary and alternate board of governor has to participate in one committee or work group during their term on the board. I know some chapters in their bylaws actually require that people serve on committees before they even get on the board so that they kind of get a sense of what's going on at the chapter, what kind of work is involved, and sort of get that commitment from them. I think the impetus for this more was that a couple years ago when we had another work group reviewing this issue, they found that even when we had a board of 150, only 50 people served on any committee. And then of those 50 people, more than half were only on one, and then the other 20 or 25 people served on up to maybe 6 committees. So it was not really well spaced out. They want to get, you know, additional voices, get people involved in a lot of the good projects and things that are going on in the organization happen on these work groups and committees. So we, you know, need to obviously redo that. The president also is entitled to appoint chair people to committees and potentially not renew certain work groups if they're not necessary. So there are going to be some changes to that. And so if you're looking for a home or you just generally have interest in participating in something, let Bridget know, and we'll be happy to bring that to the chair of the particular work group. Alternate Board of Governor members are not required to attend, but of course they can if they'd like to, even if your primary is there. The organization, meaning the state office, through chapter dues, pays for the primary Board of Governor to come to the meeting, but not the alternate if the primary is also there. So that's up to the chapter if they want to pay for the alternate to be there if the primary is there. The other thing is we really wanted to encourage there to be a voice in all cases where possible. So if your primary cannot come, the alternate obviously can come in their place, and then in that case would be able to vote and do all the things that the primary Board of Governor would have been able to do. If you know ahead of time that that's going to be the case, certainly let us know. However, if there's some emergency and your primary can't come on the day of the board meeting, there's no notice that's necessary. The alternate can just show up and they will be entitled to vote. The one thing that I would say that we've sort of been seeing in some situations is that, you know, chapters are, for understandable reasons, wanting to make sure that they have a vote at each meeting or at certain meetings. And so there have been cases where neither the primary nor the alternate can come, and they've been trying to put someone else in only for one meeting, and then that person resigns, and then they want their primary back in. Certain things obviously can't be avoided, but what we really are looking to do is have this board be like, you know, a real board, for lack of a better term, and really to be like your chapter board and any other corporate organization, where the people who are elected as your primaries and alternates are your board members. You know, if you at your chapter board somebody couldn't come, that vote would just be forfeited. You can't just substitute somebody else sort of in. So when you're thinking about who you want to put up for your primary and alternate, try to make sure that there's somebody who has the commitment to be able to attend, you know, most if not all of the meetings for the year. Just seeing if we have any questions here.
There's a hand icon. Maybe she's.
Okay, again, if you have questions, type them into the questions box and we can respond to them either now or after. So the term limits that was another change that was instituted. We didn't have those before. So starting this past October, the board members who were elected are going to be in 2-year terms. The max is 3 consecutive, so 6 years altogether consecutive, and then you'll have to step off the board or potentially swap to the alternate role. Again, as we mentioned before, the regions, there are 8 of them. Each one of them gets a vice president. The idea behind the regions was that they would meet twice a year, hopefully organized by your regional vice president. If you have concerns as a board member, you really should, I mean, certainly you can contact any of us as well, but your regional vice president can also be a good person to go to for questions. If you want to organize something as a region or have an issue that's particular to your region, feel free to reach out to your regional vice president. They can, bring those issues back to us, or deal with it on their own. That's up to them. I do have a question here. I'll just stop and take it. Wondering whether the chapter manual is available on the website. I don't believe it is at this point. So typically what we do is when we update it once or twice a year, depending on when changes are made to the policies by the board, we will send it out by email. I know the website has been redesigned recently, and there is, I believe, a back end to it that is intended to have a space where these documents will live. I don't know that that's currently functioning. So for now, we'll rely on email, and then once it's available on the website, we'll be sure to let you know. As I was saying, with the regions, the idea from the former governance work group was really to foster local communication and regional communication. So if the Board of Governors in a particular region or the chapter board members who aren't on the Board of Governors have questions or issues, that they could meet, talk about those, and have the Board of Governor or the Vice President bring those issues forward to the bigger organization. And it can also be to discuss particular issues prior to a board meeting if they're complicated or needing a lot of discussion, so that everybody can sort of understand the viewpoints and have time to ask questions. As John mentioned before, the executive committee is your 8 regional vice presidents. There is 1 rep from a developmental center chapter if the regional vice presidents don't already come from one of those chapters. The secretary, the president, the assistant treasurer, the treasurer, and the immediate past president of the organization who sits on the committee but doesn't have a vote. So that's who makes up the executive committee, about 15 or 16 people. And as John said before, they have pretty broad authority in between Board of Governors meetings to approve chapter requests, to make certain decisions. Those minutes are all sent to you as Board of Governor members after those meetings, after those minutes are approved. If you have questions about any of those, certainly can raise those to your regional vice president or to really any other individual. That's really meant for you to have a good understanding of what's going on in between your board meetings. Sorry. Okay. As John mentioned, the committees of the organization, just like your chapters, have a very important purpose. They really are tasked with doing specific things that the whole body doesn't have the ability or time to really put to. We have a list of standing committees such as guardianship, budget and finance, audit, compliance, legal, things like that. And then in addition to that, we have a number of ad hoc or sort of temporary or task-based committees that are supposed to look at certain things and report back to the organization. Another question here. How can an alternate Board of Governor find out which committees or work groups need members and get connected to that work group? I would say send an inquiry to Bridget and find that out. As I said, right now the committee, some of the committee leadership positions are in flux. As I mentioned, the president, we obviously have a new president, and Sandy Gumarov has the authority to, each year those chair people are reappointed, and that's up to the president to do, and in turn the chair people then appoint the members of those committees. So once we get the list of who the committee chairs finalized are, we'll be in a better position to figure out which committees need work groups. But for now, if you have interest in something, certainly send that to Bridget, and we will keep that in mind as we proceed. Not going to dwell on these provisions too much, but there are provisions for the removal of a member of the organization, that being somebody who pays to become a member of your chapter, therefore of the organization, or removal of Board of Governors as well. Sometimes I've been here almost 7 years and this has not happened, and I think it's likely to happen less now that we're meeting 4 times a year instead of 2. But just like a chapter board meeting, aside from your regularly scheduled meetings, there is also the possibility that a special meeting would get called in between. That could happen if certain criteria were met. So again, always an option. Hopefully we wouldn't need to do that with the more frequent meetings. The nominating committee is another standing committee. We just made a change for those of you who were at the October Board of Governors meeting to that structure before, and I'm not sure why this was the way that it was, but before this, the nominating committee was never added to the slate that the nominating committee took up in terms of advanced notice of who we were going to nominate for election to the nominating committee. And those nominations were done from the floor, which in past years has caused some unnecessary delays in the meeting, or regions didn't know quite who their individual was going to be. And in the chapters, that is not the way that it's done. It's the people are put on the slate in advance. So for the spring, when suggestions are made for those positions, that will be added to the list. So and what John is referring to, we'll be sending out an updated chapter manual that reflects that change. Okay. So that's sort of it for the basics, and then the last part really relates to a lot of the things that John already so well covered in the beginning. The role of you as board members for the entire corporation really centers around these 3 topics, and they do have some overlap. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to explain the differences between them, but I think at the end of the day, it really comes back to your role in the oversight and the management of the assets and property of this organization. It's very large, it's very diverse. There's a lot of delegated functions, and so it can be hard to kind of wrap your head around that and keep that in mind when you're sitting at the board meeting, especially when it's possible that a decision that you may make may conflict with what your chapter would want, or could have a negative impact on your chapter. So we'll go through what these 3 things kind of mean in real life. So when we say a fiduciary duty, that's really the legal responsibility that you have to the organization. The first one is duty of care, and the legal standard, which I won't repeat, is really what's on that first bullet. And what it really means is that you're prepared, you're thoughtful, you are asking questions, you're reviewing the minutes, you're reviewing board pack, for example, when we get it up, is understanding what are the decisions that you're going to be asked to make. You are feeling like you have enough information to make those decisions, and if you don't feel that way, you're asking questions of the board, of the executive committee, of the state office to get yourself prepared. Acting in good faith, doing what's best for the organization at the time that you're making these decisions, and believing that what you're doing is in the best interest of the organization. And then that bottom note there really relates to, you don't have to have, we're going to be faced, I think, as an organization with a lot of complicated decisions going forward, particularly relative to managed care and some other things. And I know, many of us are not experts in that topic, and there's lots of things that we have expertise in, but nobody can be an expert in everything. So it's perfectly okay for you to rely on experts, and that can be outside consultants, that can be staff at the state office, that can be other board members who know what they're talking about and have experience in something. But your job is basically to gather the information that you feel that you need to make the best decision in the interest of the organization, and if you don't have it, to say so. The courts have taken these duties and sort of, based on factual situations, decided what they think might be a problem. And some of these are obvious, but a fraud, which is pretending something is that it's not. Obviously, illegal conduct, potentially conflict of interest, which we'll talk about under duty of loyalty as well. Bad faith, you're doing something that is the best for the organization, but doing it anyway. And some of these other things, I can't imagine that these are issues, but they're obvious examples of where a director breaches a duty of care in their role on a board. Okay, sorry about the little rolly thing here. Duty of loyalty, again, different. It's more faithfulness to the organization, and this really has to do with in a lot of ways, your role in the chapter versus your role in the Board of Governors, or your role in any outside interests that you may have versus your role as a board member for the organization. So your interest has to be undivided. So decisions you make have to only be based on what's best for NYSARC as a whole and what's in its best interest, not making decisions that might be benefiting you personally. And conflict of interest is a big piece of this. So as I think all of you know, every year the law actually requires that we obtain conflict of interest statements from you, and I'll make this my plug for those of you who may be on the webinar that have not done that yet or have had an email from us asking for it. We're trying to use DocuSign to make that a simpler process. Before, we would have had to email a copy of the document, you would have had to print it, sign it, scan it, send it back to us. This allows you, in a matter of seconds, hopefully, to really just check a box, yes or no, whether you have a conflict or whether you might think you might have one, and to enter some information about that and then electronically sign it. That again is required by law for us to have. The audit committee of the corporation oversees compliance with that policy. So if we have an issue obtaining one, and I know we have quite a few people that we still need them from, we need to sort of follow that up with the audit committee. Your chapter boards, I'm sure, ask you to sign conflict of interest statements in your role as a chapter board member. It's the same thing. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, please do that as soon as you can. It's an important thing for us to know. If there are decisions coming before the Board of Governors that might be relative to something you're involved in or a business transaction that you have some interest in, it doesn't come up often, but we do need to know when it does come up, because they do require the individual who might have a conflict to actually physically not be in the room while the issue is discussed. And so it's important to know, and violations of that can be a problem for the organization. So just keep your eyes peeled for emails on that. And if you're not sure, let us know. We'll try to resolve that. And this really relates to what I kind of said. Having a financial interest in an entity that we're having a transaction with. So you're a partner in a law firm, and the organization is engaging that firm to do work on its behalf. We need to know about those things. Not that you get compensation for this job, but voting on something, again, that has an impact on you personally, or learning about something in connection with your role as a board member and then using it to the advantage of another entity or individual, that would be a problem as well. So that's really what the duty of loyalty is trying to get at. And then duty of obedience is kind of similar to duty of loyalty, but it really more relates to the organization's operations really relative to its mission. Our mission is in the chapter manual in sort of bulleted format. We're here to provide the best in services and advocacy for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. So that is the impetus, should be the impetus behind all decisions that we make as an organization. We are also obviously a provider of services, so we have to keep that in mind too. But when you're considering decisions that you're making, you have to be acting consistent with our mission and our policies that we've adopted in order to keep the organization in compliance. It's, the third one down, ensuring that we carry out its purposes and we don't engage in unauthorized activities. If you see something that's going on or you learn of something that's a problem, you should bring that to the attention of the board or the state office to make sure that gets resolved. Again, problem at one chapter is a problem for all of us. So if there are issues, we really do need to know about those. And making sure that the chapters are following the chapter manual. So when you go back, being a good steward as a chapter of the policies is really there to make sure that the organization as a whole is in good shape. And so again, it is slightly different than duty of loyalty, but these are the three things that courts have said, this is the responsibility of a board member in carrying out the responsibilities of the organization. And then I think that's the last slide. So I just want to make sure before we wrap whether there were any questions. We answered the couple that came up as we were going, but does anybody, let's see, have any other questions before we end? And again, we will send out the slides and a link to this webinar to all of you, and also be looking for a link to the chapter manual once that gets, again, revised. But please contact John and I or any other member of the state office if you have questions in any particular areas. John mentioned we have Beth Legier as our governmental affairs individual with advocacy and legislative concerns. We have our chief financial officer and other finance staff that can deal with issues all the way from rate rationalization to, individual chapter concerns. We have, several members in the compliance team. So if you have a question about something going on, please reach out to us. That is what we're here to do. We're here to be helpful, and to make sure that the duties that you've delegated to the chapters are, being fulfilled. So consider us a resource and reach out to us at any time. I think our contact information is all on the website. The main number, obviously you can reach any of us that way. And seeing no other questions, I think we'll end. Thank you so much for attending during your lunchtime, and we'll be seeing you soon.